Your lecturer is Mark Leary. Dr. Leary is the Gorancic Family Emeritus Professor of Psychology and Neuroscience at Duke University. He is the author of Self-Presentation, Impression Management and Interpersonal Behavior, and he blogs regularly for Psychology Today.
Have you ever thought about how quickly you form impressions of other people? Both the speed and the ease with which you size other people up is really rather remarkable. If you chat with someone for just a minute or two, and then I ask you, what's your impression of that person? What do you think he or she is like? You'll usually find that you've already drawn at least some general assumptions, if not specific conclusions, about the person's characteristics. Sometimes it takes only a glance at someone to start forming impressions of them. In fact, in a relatively short amount of time, certainly long before I finish this first lecture, you will have started to form a rather comprehensive impression of me. You will have started to piece together lots of clues about what I'm like, clues about my personality, my interests, my attitudes, maybe even my mood today. You'll take into account what I say, the tone of my voice, the examples I use, my sense of humor or lack of it, and the fact that I'm a college professor teaching a course for the great courses. You'll automatically put it all together and start forming an impression. Now, the impressions that we form of other people may or may not be accurate, even after a good deal of contact with them. After all, we're making lots of inferences and assumptions about people based on limited information. But still, we usually feel like we've gotten a pretty good idea about what they're like. And then something important happens. Once we start to form an impression of what someone is like, that impression immediately begins to affect how we feel about and interact with the person. The impressions we form of people strongly affect how we treat them. In fact, in a weird sort of way, when you interact with other people, you aren't actually interacting with them. Let me say that again. When you interact with others, with your family, your friends, romantic partners, coworkers, neighbors, or just people in the store or on the bus or on the street, you're not interacting with them as the complex, multifaceted people they actually are. Rather, you're just interacting with your impressions of them. You're responding to them on the basis of your impressions of what you think they're like, your impressions of their personalities, their abilities, what their motives are, their social class, their attitudes, and so on. And if your impression of them changed, if you decided that they weren't as nice or as smart or as trustworthy as you first thought, then how you treat them would also change. Of course, as you're forming impressions of other people, they're also forming impressions of you. And those impressions affect how other people behave toward you, how they treat you. After all, that's really all other people have to go on when they interact with you. They construct an impression of you from snippets of information, make some inferences and draw some conclusions, and then react to you based on that impression. What this means is that social interactions and relationships are heavily influenced by the impressions that people have of each other, whether those impressions are accurate or not. So how people treat us is always influenced to some extent by the impressions they have of us. That's how social interaction works. Now, deep down, we all know this, of course, which is why we're often concerned with what other people think of us. We all know that, like it or not, the impressions we make on other people matter. And it's also why we sometimes try to make certain kinds of impressions on other people. We know that how we fare in life depends, at least to an extent, on how other people view us. So we're often motivated to control other people's impressions of us. Not only their impressions of our personal characteristics, such as whether we're intelligent or trustworthy or kind, but also their impressions of what we might be thinking or feeling at the moment, impressions of our intentions, our attitudes, our mood, and our reactions to them. For example, in a romantic relationship, you generally want to give your partner the impression that you're interested in what they're saying. Even if you're not actually interested in some particular conversation, you know that you better look like you are. So, no matter what else we might be doing, we usually keep an eye on other people's impressions of us, and our efforts to be viewed in certain ways, and not to be viewed in other ways, affects a good deal of our behavior in everyday life. That's what this course is about. Why we pay so much attention to what others think of us, the variety of ways we manage our impressions, and the far-reaching effects of self-presentation on our behaviors, emotions, and well-being. I'm hopeful that as we dig into what behavioral researchers have learned about self-presentation, you'll gain a deeper understanding of yourself and the people around you, and you'll be able to use these insights to navigate your own social world more effectively. Let me say that I am incredibly enthused to be talking about self-presentation, because it's the primary topic that has engaged my interest and my own research in social psychology for more than 40 years. I've been so intrigued for so long because I'm continually seeing new ways in which people's concerns with others' impressions affect their behavior, their relationships, and the quality of their lives. In my first week of graduate school, many years ago, my advisor sent me off to buy 2 classic books on self-presentation so that I could start thinking about the role that impression management plays in human life. Since then, I've conducted dozens of research studies and written many articles on the topic, some of which I'll talk about along the way. I've been studying this stuff for a long time, and I'm delighted to pull it all together in this course. So thanks for joining me. Let me begin by clarifying 2 terms. What we're going to be talking about goes by 2 names: self-presentation and impression management. We can say that people present certain images of themselves to other people, that is, they engage in self-presentation, or we can say that they manage the impressions that other people form of them. They engage in impression management. Now, technically, these 2 terms are not perfectly interchangeable, because people sometimes manage the impressions of people and things other than themselves. You might try to give someone a particular impression of yourself, or you might try to manage someone's impression of, say, a friend of yours, or your mother, or a coworker. Parents sometimes try to manage other people's impressions of their children. These are all cases of impression management, but they aren't necessarily self-presentation. But impression management is self-presentation when you're managing people's impressions of you. Since we'll be talking mostly about people managing impressions of themselves, both terms, impression management and self-presentation, are equally correct. So for our purposes, I'll be using them interchangeably. From time to time, we all recognize that we're concerned with what other people might be thinking about us. And sometimes we know that we try to influence other people to see us in a particular way. What we often don't appreciate, though, is that these concerns with our public impressions are an ongoing, inherent part of almost every social interaction. There are very few situations involving other people where there isn't some reason for you to try to convey certain impressions of yourself. Whether you're interacting with people face-to-face, or talking on the phone, or posting things on social media, other people's impressions of you make a difference. I know that you might be thinking, well, I definitely want to put my best foot forward in certain situations. And yeah, sometimes I try to make a particular impression on people here and there. But I'm not always concerned with how I'm coming across to other people. Well, not consciously perhaps, but a concern with others' impressions almost always lurks in the background of all social encounters. As long as things are going well in an interaction, we may not be thinking consciously about how we're viewed by other people or try to make a particular impression. But we're still keeping an eye on things. We're still monitoring how we're coming across. Because at any moment, something can happen that triggers our desire to manage someone's impressions of us. To take an extreme example, imagine being in a mindless, casual conversation when suddenly some deep, dark secret about you, something you've always wanted to keep hidden, somehow comes to light. You'd probably be mortified and try to undo the damage to your image. The fact that you'd probably be embarrassed and start explaining yourself shows that you were concerned about others' impressions all along. As long as things were going well, you weren't consciously thinking about how other people were viewing you. Yet, at some level, you were still monitoring events and other people's reactions. Whether situations are going badly, as when you embarrass yourself, or going well, as when you're praised or win an award, or are just neutral, you regularly monitor how you appear to others and adjust your behavior to make desired impressions. By the time we get to the end of this course, I think you'll see that your life is infused with self-presentational concerns almost everywhere you go, but you aren't always thinking consciously about them. But why are we so concerned with what other people think of us? What difference does it make whether we create one impression or another? What are we trying to obtain when we manage our impressions? Well, first, making the right impressions, whatever those may be in a particular situation, is critical to having good relationships with other people. You aren't going to win over many friends or romantic partners or even friendly coworkers if everybody has unfavorable impressions of you. And making undesired impressions usually makes social interactions awkward and unrewarding. We sometimes talk about people managing their impressions to gain social approval. And that's part of it. We often want people to view us positively and to like us. But strictly speaking, we're not usually interested in social approval for its own sake. Just having other people approve of us doesn't do us much good unless their approval benefits us somehow. And it's those benefits of approval we're sometimes after, not just approval itself. So don't think of self-presentation just in terms of people seeking approval or wanting to be liked. Self-presentation plays a much broader role in our lives than that. At its core, self-presentation is about pursuing our goals. It's a way of increasing the likelihood that we'll get what we want by influencing other people to respond to us the way we would like. In fact, Edward Jones, the researcher who conducted the first social psychological experiments on self-presentation in the 1960s, explicitly conceptualized self-presentation as a social influence strategy, a way of influencing other people to behave in ways that help us achieve various goals. If we think that being seen as likable or getting social approval from others will help us achieve certain goals, we may manage our impressions to obtain approval. But approval isn't always what we're after. For example, maybe what you really want is a job. A job interview is essentially an exercise in self-presentation. Can I convey to this interviewer that I have the skills, experience, and personality to be a good employee? The impressions people convey of themselves in a job interview can make or break their chances of getting the job. I've seen many cases where the job applicant who clearly had the best credentials on paper didn't get the offer because he or she made a bad impression during the interview. Or consider the importance of appearing confident when leading a team, be it a team of soldiers or athletes or fellow workers. When you're in charge of things, it's helpful to look like you know what you're doing, even if you don't. So people in leadership roles sometimes manage their impressions to appear confident and in control, no matter how they may actually be feeling. Or maybe you've found yourself in charge of a bunch of people who aren't doing what they should. Maybe you're the boss and your employees are slacking off. Or you're a school teacher with a classroom full of unruly students. Your goal is to get them to straighten up and take things seriously. If that's your goal, it might help to give them a clear impression that you're completely fed up and won't tolerate any more foolishness. In each of these examples, people use self-presentation to achieve a goal, to get a job, to lead a team of people, to get others to do what they want. But it has little, if anything, to do with social approval. In fact, as we'll see later, sometimes people purposefully manage their impressions in ways that convey a negative impression and that make others dislike them, if doing so helps them achieve their goals. So self-presentation isn't just about making good impressions or getting approval. More importantly, it's about conveying images of ourselves that might help achieve our goals. The idea of impression management often conjures up images of deception and duplicity, in which people pretend to be somebody they're not. It makes people sound like social chameleons who change their color as they move from one interaction to the next. People who lie about themselves to get what they want. And of course, people sometimes do misrepresent who they are or what they're like. We've all embellished our social images to appear a little smarter, or a little more virtuous, or a little more responsible than we really are. But I want to be clear up front that although people do occasionally convey impressions of themselves that they know aren't completely true, a good deal of impression management is not so nefarious. In fact, we often impression manage in order to convey images of ourselves that we believe are accurate and honest. Now, that might sound strange at first. Why would we manage our impressions to lead other people to form accurate impressions of us? One answer is that sometimes we want other people to know something about us that they wouldn't necessarily see if we didn't manage our impressions to convey that particular image. So we make a conscious effort to communicate an authentic image of ourselves. Many things about you may not be obvious to other people just in the course of ordinary social interactions. If other people knowing certain things about you helps you to achieve some goal, then understanding how to convey such impressions is key. That's easy to see in situations such as a job interview, in which a highly qualified applicant wants the interviewer to see him or her accurately. But to be seen accurately, the applicant has to put on a bit of a show to be sure that the image comes through loud and clear. You can also see this impression management strategy in action when people want to be certain that other people pick up on what they're feeling at the moment, that other people know they're angry or happy or afraid or whatever. It's not always easy to see what other people are feeling. So people sometimes manage their impressions to be sure that others can perceive their genuine emotions and other reactions. In those cases when people impression manage to convey accurate impressions of themselves, they're being tactical from a self-presentational standpoint, while also being perfectly honest. Having studied and taught about self-presentation for a long time, I know that a lot of people feel a bit uneasy about the fact that they sometimes try to make certain impressions on other people. For some people, the whole idea of impression management seems superficial or inauthentic or just downright dishonest. In fact, I've heard many people say that they think we should all just act naturally, just be ourselves, and we shouldn't be concerned with what other people might think. Well, that might sound good, but think for a moment about what life would be like if everybody always acted naturally and did exactly what they wanted to, and nobody was ever concerned about what other people thought of them. To a large extent, people's concerns with what other people think of them help to keep their behavior within appropriate bounds so that we can interact effectively with each other. Self-presentation is often needed in the service of decorum, politeness, and concern for other people. The main reason that we follow basic social rules about civility is that we'll make a really bad impression if we don't. Likewise, do we really want people to say whatever's on their mind? To express their true thoughts and feelings at all times? And should people always be completely open about their darkest secrets, greatest shortcomings, and personal problems? Tailoring your self-presentations to the current social context is mostly healthy and adaptive. In fact, in many situations, presenting your characteristics, attitudes, or emotions completely honestly would be an indication of a serious psychological disorder. People who disclose information about themselves at times and places that are socially inappropriate in order to be real or authentic often disrupt social encounters, evoke negative reactions from other people, and cause a whole lot of social, professional, and even legal problems for themselves. I think it's safe to say that we wouldn't want to live in a world in which people weren't concerned with what other people thought of them. No matter what some people might say, everybody, literally every normal, well-adjusted person engages in self-presentation. It's an essential feature of civilized social life. As I said earlier, we regularly monitor how we're coming across to other people. No matter what we might be doing, we usually keep an eye on our public image. But that doesn't mean that we're always thinking consciously about the impressions we want to convey, or consciously figuring out how to behave in order to make those impressions. A fair amount of self-presentation occurs automatically, without us thinking about it consciously, or making deliberate decisions to behave in a particular way. The thing that makes a behavior self-presentational is that it's motivated by the desire to make a particular impression on other people. But those motives can operate at either a conscious or a non-conscious level. Sometimes we think carefully about what we're doing, and sometimes we don't. For example, some of our self-presentational behaviors are so automatic and so routine that they operate as habits. Habits are behaviors that are triggered automatically by situational cues without us having to think consciously about them. Consider the category of behaviors that involve grooming. Things like showering, shaving, using deodorant, combing your hair, brushing your teeth. Why do we do these things? We obviously do them mostly because they affect how we look and smell, and thus they affect other people's impressions of us. So grooming is motivated primarily, though not entirely, by self-presentational concerns. But I doubt that you consciously decide to do these sorts of things in order to make the right impression. You don't get up in the morning and think, what should I do so I won't make a bad impression on other people? Oh, I know. I'll take a shower and use deodorant and comb my hair. When you were young, your parents probably had to remind you to do these things every morning. But you've been doing them for so long now that they've become habits, and you do them without much conscious thought. But these behaviors are still self-presentational because they're motivated by your desire to influence other people's impressions of you in certain ways. Of course, at other times, we do think consciously about the impressions we want to make or don't want to make, and we decide the best way to proceed. Even in the case of grooming and getting ready to leave the house, we sometimes consciously consider what clothes to wear so that we make an appropriate impression wherever it is we're headed. We don't want to wear swimwear to work. So many instances of self-presentation are conscious and deliberate, and some are so habitual that we engage in them automatically without thinking. If you think about the people you know, you can probably think of some who are really concerned with what other people think of them, maybe too concerned for their own good. And you can probably think of a few who aren't concerned enough, people who would be better off if they thought a little more about the impressions they make. We'll be talking throughout the course about why some people impression manage more than other people do. But let's look at just one reason for starters. In order for people to deliberately manage their impressions, they have to be aware at some level that other people are thinking about them. That's pretty obvious. You aren't going to be concerned about other people's impression of you unless you're aware that they're thinking about and forming impressions of you, right? Well, interestingly, people differ in how much they tend to think about the fact that other people are forming impressions of them. This personality characteristic is called public self-consciousness, and it involves how much people think about the public, observable parts of themselves that can be perceived by other people. How many times a day do you think about others' impressions of you? What they might be thinking about what you look like, drawing inferences about your personality and other characteristics, wondering about your intentions, thinking about what you're feeling, and so on. The higher people are in public self-consciousness, the more they think about the impressions that other people might be forming of them. And the more people think about the impressions other people are forming, the more concerned they are about how they come across to other people, and the more often they engage in impression management. In fact, people who score higher in public self-consciousness are more likely to feel that they are being observed by other people than those who score lower in public self-consciousness. Just walking down the street or standing in line at the grocery store. People who score higher in public self-consciousness are more likely to think that other people are noticing and thinking about them. These differences in public self-consciousness show up in many aspects of people's behavior. For example, people higher in public self-consciousness look at themselves in the mirror more often than people who are low in public self-consciousness. They're also more concerned with their physical appearance and do more things to make themselves look better. For example, women who are higher in public self-consciousness report wearing makeup more often. In fact, in one study, women higher in public self-consciousness had more makeup on at the time they participated in the study. Along the same lines, a recent study of people's daily choices of what clothes to wear showed that people high in public self-consciousness based their clothing choices more heavily on self-presentational factors, such as wanting to impress a specific person, to create a specific image, or to make an overall good impression. They also indicated that how they dressed was more important to them. Public self-consciousness is also associated with trying to make different impressions on different people. One study showed that participants who scored higher in public self-consciousness reported behaving more differently when they were with different people, which suggests that publicly self-conscious people use more distinct persona when interacting with different people. People who score high in public self-consciousness also present themselves to other people in ways that are more discrepant from how they see themselves than people who are low in public self-consciousness. Because people who are higher in public self-consciousness are particularly concerned about how other people perceive and evaluate them, they tend to be more nervous in social situations. That is, they tend to score higher in social anxiety. In contrast, people who don't think as much about what other people think about them, those low in public self-consciousness, are less concerned with other people's evaluations and tend to be less socially anxious. We'll be talking more about why some people differ in their self-presentational behaviors as we go along. Understanding how and why some people impression manage more and in different ways than other people do reveals some fascinating insight about people's personalities, including yours. But the bottom line is that everybody, and I mean everybody, manages their impressions to some extent. We rarely escape our concerns with what other people think, and exploring self-presentation can reveal a good deal of insight into human motivation and behavior that you may have never considered. I look forward to taking you on a journey of self-discovery. Let's go.